Great, thank you. Yes, so I'm Chris McKee. I am the product marketing lead for the network security products. Here today talking about the defending against evolving network security threats. So I'll open this up with things that I think everybody's pretty familiar with in terms of the network security landscape and how it's changing today. You look at the attackers, they're much more professional. You look at the way they're breaking in, they're covering their tracks, they're going into being more persistent. These are no longer smash and grab type of attacks, but they're going in, obfuscating their tracks, hiding their footprints, and they tend to be staying in longer. Again, so they're sophisticated to the point where they're staying in, and this is from the latest Mandiant report, over 100 days. So that gives them time to, once they're in your network, they're moving laterally, they're searching around for other stepping stones to jump to ultimately get to intellectual property or anything else that's prized. Compounding this and making it more challenging for many of you is the fact that you're lacking those resources. You don't have the resources to really address the problems that these hackers are bringing you today. Adding to that, networks are changing. So again, speed increases, you see network sprawl, really driving the issue of visibility. How do I see more with my network as it is going through these changes? And then ultimately what that comes down to is, well, how do I reduce that dwell time? What are the technologies I can put in place? What are the things I can do to address once a hacker gets in? How do I reduce that dwell time? So today, Bill Cantrell, our VP of Product Management for Network Security, is going to go over a lot of new and exciting things. So sit down, hold on tight, because there's going to be a lot we're going to cover in a very short period of time. We're going to talk about the latest developments in network security, some of the new products and technologies there. We're going to talk briefly about file content security, network forensics, and then we're going to do some really cool things about Smart Vision. We've got a demo coming up in that as well, followed by a customer. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Bill Cantrell. Bill?
Thanks a lot, Chris. So welcome everyone to the network session here, and as Chris mentioned, we're going to go over some of the great new announcements on the network protection front, and then we're going to show you a cool demo of our latest lateral move detection capabilities, and then we've got a great customer presentation. So I'm kind of a visual person, so I like to sort of highlight visually what we're going to be talking about here. If you can see on these slides, our traditional product, the NX, is our north-south detection mechanism, IPS functionalities. The PX and IA are our forensic solutions, so your back-in-time visibility capabilities. And then our new introduction into the market is Smart Vision, which we announced this year, which gives you lateral move protection. So complete coverage of your network, both north, south, east, west, and back in time. So if you're familiar with Gartner's reference architecture, 5 styles of advanced threat defense, on the network side, we cover the top 3. So let's take a look at the payload analysis or sandboxing reference architecture here, a segment that FireEye invented. So on the network security front, we've provided greater value with a new generation. We're onto our 5th generation of products now. They incorporate things like SSL intercept, higher performing appliances at 10 gig. We have our MVX separation, which allows you to double the throughput of your existing appliances by pulling the MVX engine out and either leveraging our cloud solution for that or our on-prem VX cluster that you can deploy yourself. And then the neat thing on the detection side is our new detection innovation architecture that we're leveraging. So we're coming out with new machine learning AI modules that go in across the board on the appliances and provide you some unique new capabilities that we're leveraging from our incident responders and from our analysts, things that they learn with dealing with these things in the field. We're kind of leveraging that going forward in the appliances. So you'll start to see things that's like what's listed up here for Malware Guard, an AI that's trained to look for malicious binaries by looking at a repository of millions of malicious binaries that we have and learning the characteristics of them. SSL beaconing and fingerprinting are great ways to look at SSL traffic without having to decrypt it, CLS and SSL. So even if you do deploy a decryption solution, as you know, you're going to whitelist certain traffic. There's certain PII sites and things like that that you don't want to decrypt. But we're giving you ways to go into that traffic and look for patterns, even without decrypting it, to tell you it might be beaconing inside of there, it might be different types of interactions. The setup fingerprint means that it could have characteristics of a malicious session. So lots of new visibility capabilities there. On the FX front, we have a virtual and an appliance version of our file scanning product now, and it's integrated with OneDrive and SharePoint. So this gives you complete protection across some of those content directories. We'll be adding more and more of these going forward. You'll see a lot more integrations for this product line. So stepping over to style number 2, which is the forensic side of things, we have our PX and IA appliances. So these are essentially your network traffic recorders. They allow you to go back in time. They let your analysts pivot quickly back to individual sessions and objects that they need to investigate. These are, you kind of liken these to, if you have a bank and you've got alarms on your door, you may have an alarm that says, well, something got in here at 2 a.m. last night. If I don't have a video camera, I can't look at, was there a car parked out front? How tall was this person? Did they carry 2 or 3 boxes out? So the PXIA solution is kind of that kind of an analogy. It gives you the ability to go back in time and look at exactly what happened, what got out of the network, how they got in, reconstruct the entire workflow. So this product line has had several advancements. It's industry leading as far as capture rates, capabilities like that, and then searching traffic in seconds and minutes rather than hours and days like some of the competitors do. So on that front, we have storage solutions that allow you to scale very quickly, and you can add new storage solutions. There's new hardware storage here, and then back in time IOC analysis. So we've added the capability to take feeds like iSight, Open IOC, Stix feeds, and look back in time, not just real time. So you can integrate those obviously with an IPS appliance or some real-time alerting, but the forensic solution gives you the ability to take those IOCs and say, well, I didn't know this was malicious until just now. Can I go back in time 2-3 days a week and see if any of this was present and any of this activity was in the network before then? So lastly, we're going to look at the network traffic analysis space. This is new for us. We've got a great new product offering here called Smart Vision. This product now takes us from the traditional initial infection phase, which is where the NX has traditionally provided protection, into the lateral movement, what attackers do after they get in, establishing footholds, spreading laterally, looking to upgrade privileges, escalate privileges, et cetera. And we've got a great demo of this and a great talk on this that Chris is going to give us now. So I'll introduce Chris DiGiamo, one of our lead architects.
Thank you, Bill. So, what is Smart Vision? Why does Smart Vision exist? Well, one of the things that I've realized doing investigations at Mandiant is that finding the attackers, finding that initial compromise is sometimes extremely hard to do and sometimes actually impossible. Sometimes that initial compromise is going to happen while maybe an employee is at home on a laptop, or maybe that initial compromise is going to happen before you have your security solutions in place that you're purchasing, or maybe it's going to happen through a vendor that you trust. So these things are really difficult for us to find legitimately in the wild every time with 100% accuracy. And so only looking for those initial intrusions, we've found legitimately in the field to be kind of a failure of doing an investigation. I would love to be able to catch 100% of everything that's going to happen in the world, but we see time and time again that some zero-day comes out, some new technique, maybe it's our Intel chips, maybe it's Heartbleed, maybe it's something else that we just never knew about. We don't really know how to defend against it. So where are other ways that we can actually move our security? Can we look at the security actually happening on the inside of the network? If we know that they can break in, but still when they break in, they have to kind of move around and jump onto the systems and do other things internally, I want to be able to catch them at that too. And so, really this kind of feature was derived from the realities of a lot of the investigations we face. We started finding that time and time again, the attacker has 10,000 ways to get into the environment, but once they get in, they usually have to do a handful of certain tests. They have to find systems, they have to get credentials, they have to find where the stuff they want to steal is and get it out of the environment. And these are all different additional detection places that we're going to want to find the attacker. So, when we're thinking about smart vision and we're thinking about how to expand detection, I don't want to just look at all my traffic going to the internet. Maybe I'll find a backdoor that way, but if the attacker is using the VPN or something to get into my environment, I'm not going to find them by just looking for some type of backdoor beaconing to the internet. It's not going to happen. They're using our legitimate tools to get into our environment. So how am I going to catch them then? Well, I'm going to catch them at other locations, right? If once they start jumping between maybe the VPN environment and the SCADA environment or the payment card environment or the Windows servers or the Linux servers or something else, these all give me additional locations I might be able to detect the attacker. And now I can detect them across everything in their lifecycle and not just hope I'm trying to get them directly at their initial compromise. So how are we doing this? Well, to do this, we need to know the internal protocols. We need to see how they work. And then we need to be able to understand the metadata coming out of these protocols. And then what we want to do is we want to start chaining certain events together. And so what we call these are correlation rules. So if we see something happen like a user connect to a system, that's just one piece of the puzzle. I can maybe try to make some metrics on that. But a really more successful way is saying, hey, if I see a connection and then I see them copy a file over and then I see them run that file and then I see them maybe collect some output from that system, this is a chain of activity that only probably someone trying to remotely execute code and look at the output is going to do on a system. And I can take multiple of these correlations and put them together and really start raising my confidence that I'm identifying some unique activity internal in my environment. So again, this is just kind of a sample of what a correlation could be, right? This is someone creating a service, running something on a system, then deleting a service. If I see this happening in 30 seconds on a system, none of these things individually really make me nervous, but seeing them all happen in a short period of time from a system that I'm, maybe is not a system administrator or something like that is actually a fairly good detection strategy. And I can again add more and more things as I deem necessary, like, well, what was the file or what was the service? I can then look at that file and add more detection on top of there. So a combination of using the MVX engine and all of these different little base events, putting them together, we can start really raising our confidence to find malicious traffic happening inside our environment. So I'm going to go through a couple case studies right now, and these case studies are all real incidents in which we use smart vision and were a lot of the reasons that we actually created this solution. I don't want to just sit here and make up scenarios, and I don't have to because we respond to over 600 incidents a year. So I get to actually take the real data from real world breaches and then run them through smart vision and say, if we can't detect them here, then this tool is not working, it's not doing anything. So in this instance, we had an attacker attempting to perform credential dumping inside of an environment. Again, this is something we see in, I would say, 95% of investigations that we happen. At some point after an attacker breaks in, they need to start getting credentials. They need to figure out who the administrators are. How do I get onto the SQL server? How do I get to the payment card network or the SCADA network or something else there? In this example, and I'm sorry, these pictures are kind of tiny, what we're going to see is we saw a lot of the attacker using a specific protocol inside Windows called WMI to launch commands and launch shells on systems. And if we look at some of those events, what we can see down there, and again, I apologize for this being super tiny, is we can see some of the base events that go into this. Well, at each one of these little base events that we're saying, hey, here's this malicious category of activity, it's comprised of all these little actions that this attacker did. We can drill into each one of those actions and see what they did as part of those actions. On the right-hand side, we're providing actually metadata associated with these actions. And if you could read that, you have amazing vision, but you'd see that there's a DLL being staged on one system, and on the other system, we see actually a connection happening on the right-hand side. And this also shows us all the additional metadata that's happening in the network. If we dug into one of these events, we might see this gigantic block of really silly text that is being pushed onto the system. And decoding that silly text would show us that someone actually just dumped all of the passwords off of one of our domain controllers. So this is, again, from a real-world incident and something that we caught because we were looking at essentially what was transferring across the network. In this instance, the attacker dumped the passwords, and we caught not only the tool that they used to copy onto the system, but then after they dumped the passwords, they took those passwords they dumped and they copied them back over. And so we detected it again as it was then coming back over the network. So in this instance, and I can really apologize for this picture because this picture was actually given to us by a client who was using Smart Vision. And they said, hey, we're seeing some weird stuff. Can you guys look at this? So these colors and these arrows are actually the way that they redacted it when they sent it over to us. And because they really just they didn't really want us to know their internal environment. They just said, hey, we want you to look at these alerts and let us know if these are bad or not. And the alerts said that someone was trying to remotely execute commands on some of their systems. They didn't really know what those commands were. And I took the process of taking those commands out and then replacing a lot of things in there that are not public. But what you could see is that specifically what they were doing was they were copying certain just-in-time backdoors onto systems, and these backdoors were encrypted and pretty hard to detect. They were extracting these backdoors, and then they were taking the, running them just at one time with a C2 server to connect out and then resume their compromise on that system. So this was actually also happening through a managed service provider that they had a relationship with. So the attacker was connecting through their MSSP directly into their network and then executing commands on their environment. They, probably for good reason, said, hey, we're going to monitor the connection between our MSSP, just in case. Fortunately, in this environment, we also had FireEye HX, so we could actually look at the systems and see what was happening on them. And we did see that there were certain connections open. They've been redacted, but we then saw other systems that were also connecting in locations in which they didn't have Smart Vision enabled. So again, kind of a two-pronged approach. Try to detect the stuff internally on the host, but you can't also just be on the host and looking at the network when someone's coming in through the side door of an MSSP, right? So it's important to be able to have multiple different ways to detect stuff, even if it's not coming through our traditional front door. And then finally, this is another scenario that we had. We saw some reconnaissance, we saw some remote execution, and we saw some malware being transferred over the network. And specifically, this was kind of like some false flaggy ransomware malware called Bad Rabbit. In this screenshot, what we're seeing is that there's some type of weird reconnaissance command, and what we saw someone just do one command. They were looking to say, hey, what's running on this system? And they did another command, hey, what ports are on this system? And they did another command, what files are on this system? And the combination of one person doing any one of those things is not that strange, but when someone's doing all of those things at once very fast in a row, that's usually something a reconnaissance script does, or that's something that an attacker would maybe do very quick in succession to really kind of get a lay of the land on a system. So we identified that this weird thing was happening, and you could see in that payload that they had a script they were passing onto systems to automatically check if certain shared drives were available and to kind of see where the system's in the network, is it connected to the right domain or not. One of the also things they transferred across was a file, and what we're seeing here is that one of the things that we built into it is that if we see someone transferring files internally in the environment, we're going to rip them right out of that network traffic. We're going to throw them in our sandbox and see what they do in that sandbox. So in pretty much all the cases I work on, attackers are constantly transferring files from system to system using the protocols that are directly available with Windows to get their malware on new systems, to run password dumpers on systems, to steal files from systems. So every time these files are being transferred, we're ripping them out and seeing what they're doing and seeing if they either trip our ML with our machine learning with Malware Guard, or if they do something strange in a sandbox, and then we have a different way of detecting them that way. So what's next for Smart Vision? Well, more correlation rules, more protocols supported. We're going to start doing some unsupervised machine learning on it. So not only are we looking at these strange things that attackers are doing, but also are these things strange specifically for your environment versus being strange for maybe a finance company with systems that connect out over here all day long might be very different than a SCADA company in which these servers are only really logged into by these two people all day long. How do we figure that out? Well, we can add machine learning to these protocols and then start doing things to detect when anomalous behavior happens. And on top of that, we really want to kind of add more visualizations, more user improvements, and really get this data kind of showing you the relationships between these correlations and the activity on your system. So thank you all for that. I want to now introduce Brian, who's with Loose Technologies, and he's going to go over some customer-oriented use cases of FireEye technologies.
All right. OK, sorry.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. Is that the clicker?
Yeah, here you go.
So good afternoon. I'm a bit of a hybrid. We leverage FireEye internal to our company, and we also leverage their technologies with our clients. I'll tell you very briefly that I was a victim of a man-in-the-middle attack within a firm, and as I departed that area, I looked to the industry to see what solutions I could put in place that would stop the exfiltration of data, which I knew sort of intellectually was occurring. There's a lot of talk about infiltration, persistent attacks, and sometimes I think we overlook the need for blocking against exfiltration. So I'll walk through my deck, if I can figure out how to do that here. Okay. Is there any way to make that larger? Okay. So a little bit about who we are. We are a service-disabled veteran firm. As I said, that we focus on cyber security. We follow a federal model, and some might chuckle about that, but the truth is the federal space has spent billions of dollars on designing the proper way to implement a perimeter or cyber defenses. Perhaps they are slow to execute because of who they are, how large they are, the bureaucracy. But in our space, we find that we're able to help people with a gap closure solution to the challenges that they face. So we focus on lowering the attack profile, taking you from a high rise to a submarine, if we can, preparing you for cyber warfare before it happens. And we deal both in the persistent, the low and slow, and also in remediating kinetic attacks, which are quite different in the impact on the organization, as well as the it's just a madhouse if you're in an environment that's actively having services taken offline. So, and then reducing time to contain or remediate. So those are sort of the areas that we like to focus on. So in our practice, we find that the challenges today are not technological ones, and perhaps it's not 2010. And I sort of think of that as a pivot point when you saw certain things happening in the news, when cyber became sort of a buzzword, and in subsequent years it was making itself into, made for TV movies, right? But up until that point, we were sort of in a different paradigm from a security standpoint. It was an over-reliance on firewalls, et cetera. So today we're not running into issues with skill sets so much as mindsets. So people might be married to a specific technology. And what I mean by that is, say you're using an endpoint solution that shipped, with Windows 98. So if you think about, people will have a solution that they've used or been with, or a technical overlay that they're comfortable with, and it's not necessarily keeping up with the advents and the challenges that we're facing. Super firewalls, we sort of went away from that. Now we're back there again, where we're starting to see organizations are nesting cyber into specific products, and sometimes those products are stateful. So there's specific challenges with that. And then a failure to understand that there's a geopolitical component to cyber attacks. It is not, for instance, the prototypical Hollywood hacker that you think about that's coming against you. There are nation states that are interested in doing harm. If we levy a sanction against a country, they may attack our financials, for instance. So these are things that we've heard. This is an attempt at levity, perhaps, when we talk to clients who say, we already have a solution for that. So there's a huge mindset. If you're not even if you're in a regulated industry where you are compelled to put certain things in place, we find a lot of people who are content with a check-the-box approach. There may be specific reasons why that is important, but it can create an issue. Who would want to attack us? We had I'm sorry to laugh, but we had a company that did mobile. They aggregated traffic. They did backhaul traffic for a lot of mobile providers. And the guy, basically really said, no one even knows who we are. No one would want to attack us. So it's very difficult to convince people that they're at risk if they're not in a position where they think that they are. Or the other mindset, we have all of the best solutions, basically, where then that becomes a problem when you have a very good firewall, you've got very good DDoS, you've got very good IPS, The challenge being that none of those things really talk to one another very well. And especially in a kinetic situation where you need answers, analytics, and forensics very quickly and presentable, that becomes a challenge for you. So this is the top one here. We didn't have these problems until that tool was implemented. So there was a federal, I won't say which branch, but basically we're demoing a solution and it lit up like a Christmas tree. And they basically said after a period of time, you know, everyone, they have very, what's the word I'm looking for? They're very much driven by processes and procedures within this environment. And this triggered a lot of activity and became very difficult to interact with them and talk with them. And they basically sort of threw up their hands and said, you know, you need to pull that thing out. So you couldn't, the challenge was that they had a persistent threat within their environment. It showed them what that was, and it put them at risk. So we're air gapped and sneaker netted. So the concept that perhaps, you know, I get tempest shielding. I get the fact that if you don't have internet connectivity in an environment, that does make it harder from a traditional standpoint. But again, if someone is infiltrating and really putting thought into getting into that environment, the idea that you don't need next generation solutions because, and even next generations become something of a cliche now, but you get what I'm saying. That you don't need next generation solutions because you're relying on a physical security overlay to get you there. The other one we get to a lot now as cloud has come about as being fully embraced is that, you know, there's nothing here. The idea, I had a CIO call me because obviously something had transpired and the client asked if hypothetically we were hit and the servers were sitting out in an MSSP, are we responsible, you know, for that breach? So it's not a good place to be. The importance of perimeter complexity, obviously, that's what a lot of what we're talking about here. So our model is sufficiently complex without being needlessly so. That's, you know, that again, this is leveraging sort of a federal enterprise standard where you want a perimeter that is challenging enough to be infiltrated that the act of doing so alerts you to the attempt to do so without having something that's so complex that no one can manage it, operate it, et cetera, et cetera. So this brings me to sort of an anecdote where we had an account where we were doing a proof of value with them on an NX platform. And in this case, the CISO came back once we gave them the report and said, look, they were not for profit. And they said, look, I can't show this report to our, you know, CEO or our board. It'll look like I wasn't doing my job. They didn't actually want to, you know, show the report. So this became sort of a strange position for me. I never encountered that. And while we're having this conversation, it became sort of a protracted conversation over a couple of weeks. Well, do you want to just pull this thing out and send it back? Well, you know, I'm not sure, but I think we just need to clean up how we present what we found. While this is happening, they get hit with a real bit of malware. And I'm sitting there at 7 p.m. at night, and I call our channel person and say, hey, look, we're not sure where we're going with the proof of value on the NX platform, but we've got an actual incident that's occurred. The channel guy says, let me call the IR team. The IR team says, I think we have a key for that. So for me, the fact that they didn't have a contract, they hadn't really leveraged signed off on the solution, but just demoing it, and that the incident response team was able to give them a key and unlock the ransom was really important. It made my job a lot easier. Did I hit the wrong button? Okay. What we look for. So again, being that I'm, you know, in the space where we are, we look for things that are easy to implement. So there are, if I can talk a bit about I'll talk about a competitor without talking about a competitor. I don't really see a benefit in ever, and if I say something that sounds like I'm aligning someone, I don't mean to. But there's a company that does sort of a WAF, a web application firewall. It does really good at databases. It's sort of their key focus. It doesn't learn, though. You have to engage pro services to put it in place. And once that is in place, it's a very sticky solution because it's capable, but the problem is you really need to be very, very good at a product. So if you have a product that you're attempting to do gap closure on, and it takes a massive amount of intellect to get that product in, it's very, very difficult to help the customer. So we look for products that are easy to implement. So I have personally, and I'm not a lift the hood engineer anymore, but I've personally implemented the 3 products that we work with a lot, and they're easy to put in place. Encyclopedic and useful out of the box. So intel that comes out of the box immediately is important, and unexpected benefits. So again, a small anecdote. An account that got hit with malware that already had a network, the NX appliance in place. The NX was able to tell us that what the file name was for this attack, and it was a really long alphanumeric key. And one of the guys said, I've been searching for this for weeks, trying to attempt to understand what the name of this was. We took that. Well, here it is. Here's the hash on it. They took that and gave it to their endpoint security company. Within a day, that endpoint security company updated their DAT file and dropped the new DAT in, and they basically leveraged the AV solution that wasn't working. We enabled it to work, and it was across 17 sites, only about 1,000 desktops, but that would have been a massive issue without that ability, and it would have been very costly. So the ransom, once the dust settled on that, we had a chance to look at the NX again and said, hey, this thing has been blocking a callback. So again, it was trying to exfiltrate. So while they were hit and they had to, restore some drives, the benefit was whoever it was that was attacking them never got notified that they were successful, so they never asked for a ransom. So this was important. This is in a healthcare space, and they would have been compelled to report this. Whether they did or not, I sort of stepped out of that conversation. But the point is they were hit, but the damage was severely minimized. So again, the way we leverage in NX, for instance, is agility. You can literally put one of these appliances in. We started when they were it was a very heavy duty physical appliance, wasn't virtualized. It had most all of its intelligence on board. It was bandwidth limited and things of that nature before the MVX and the cloud augmentation came into place. The point is that even at that point, you could get one in place and configured within a couple of hours once it arrived. We also leverage it, as I just described, to augment third-party solutions. So a lot of people who have complex securities and security solutions are not able to just forklift out what they're using, and in a lot of cases, it's very you don't really want them to. What you want to do is to find a way that you can augment that technology. Say, for instance, if you think about HX, they're the endpoint solution. Maybe you've got a large environment. We were talking to an account, 70 health centers in Colorado, right? Their AV bill is, over $1 million when they renew that. But they all had an aggregate back to their data center locations where you had the critical applications. So the approach there was, let's augment at the place where you got elevated rights and domain privileges. Let's put solutions in place here, and this takes care of the things that can really get us in trouble and alert us at the ingress/egress points. To embellish other FireEye solutions. So a shameless plug for the FireEye solutions. If you take an NX, an HX, an EX, if you take these things together, they create a greater capability than their individual components. And this is, let me go back to one of my previous anecdotes. So the attack came in through a mail vector. This company was sophisticated enough, they had a DDoS solution with SSL offloading. We were focused on their IPS because we were concerned about infiltration and exfiltration, and the roadmap to address mail and endpoint was further. That was probably next year. They only had, X amount of dollars in budget, and you only had so many maintenance windows when you could change things. So the executive admin clicked on, maybe she was trying to get a deal on something on Groupon. It was not a Groupon site. She brought something in, and this is how it came in, was through, in this case, it came in through mail. So they were wide open from the mail vector. A lot of people don't really think, especially in this case, they had their own in-house exchange services with their own certificates and CA. So there's basically an SSL encrypted thread that could come in, which, despite the fact that they had a somewhat sophisticated perimeter for a commercial account, it created a big gap where you could not see into the SSL encrypted traffic. They brought in this case, it was a weaponized link that deposited malware, which moved laterally. So Overwatch, the ability to put appliances in a certain specific place, an aggregate point, an ingress egress point, and then uplift your visibility, your command and control, or situational awareness. That's how we leverage it. So got 8 minutes left. I think I can make it. Best practices and closing thoughts. So the inside threat, visibility at the outset. At the onset would probably be a better way of putting this. So the IT guys, the guys who really know their environments, who put them in, are not, these guys really know their environment. Sometimes the onset of an attack manifests itself as user complaint. Oh, the services are sort of slow today, and it's happening in a way that does not make sense, if that makes sense. So there are reasons, we're doing patching and we expect that, but there are times when certain services, like for instance, if you take Mail and Exchange, and I know a lot of people don't have their own, but Exchange has admin privileges. If you're on an admin and you click yes, if you're on an Android and you click yes to install the Outlook, you have given that Exchange server elevated rights on your phone. And an attack against that Exchange environment then translates down to a mobile device issue, right? So this is when I talk about the insider threat, the attackers are leveraging things that you natively or inherently trust and leveraging in your business to gain access to the things that they want. And I asked the engineering people to really think about in terms of what a recon into your environment looks like. So we manage a lot of carrier services, and we were notified that, hey, a carrier A said, we were scanned, and the IP space that this customer is using was hit with that scan. So it begs the question, if you scanned IP space and you saw certain ports, if you had a VoIP system, you would know that there was a VoIP system sitting there by the ports and protocols that are open. If you came across OS2 Warp, it's probably a bank or a utility company. No, I'm joking, but they really have antiquated solutions. You come across an AS400, it's financials. The point I'm making is they can just do an arbitrary scan of your IP space and understand who you are. One of the verticals that we run into a lot of issues with is healthcare, and I believe it's because, number one, the credentials that they harvest, there's a good chance that the people that they steal them from aren't going to be able to complain in 5 years when they start to reuse them. So if you think about droppers, sleepers, lateral movement, it's getting more insidious, right? There was a time, even 4 or 5 years ago, when if you were in this space, you could really think, oh yeah, I kind of have a handle on this. Well, it'd be arrogant now to say that we know what they're cooking up. So I was at an event and DoD is starting to install bots. For instance, they've got a challenge where maybe they're running payroll for 1.4 million people, and they're using bots to check to make sure there are no payroll issues before they cut checks. 1.4 million people, do that twice a month. There's literally not enough time to run that. Well, if you take that, machine learning, AI, and bots, and weaponize those things, this is the sort of nightmarish scenarios that we as security firms have to contemplate. So I talked a little bit about inline versus out of path. In a traditional perimeter where you think and work your way back, if you're talking network, it's NNI, right? If you take NNI. They can't attack an NNI network like they could a Uni network. You obviously can't attack what you're going to use to carry the signal in. You get down to your routing. Arguably, if you've got DDoS is out ahead of that. Your firewall, maybe VPN services, telework services are lateral to that, maybe deeper in the environment. You get down into IPS. These are inline solutions that are designed to, we were talking a bit earlier about, backward looking like stochastics. NetFlow uses a backward looking, this is a historical view of what's happening. This looks weird to me because it's different than what always happened before. The challenge with a sole reliance on a backward looking analysis is that it's slow. So you need inline solutions need to be informed. They need to have an intelligence. So the larger the field of view, the more intelligent those things are. And things could happen in Europe before we wake up that this network would now be aware of. And that's what becomes important, especially from an inline perspective. Again, out of path being when you want to be informed or to sit beside a network and not be susceptible to be taken offline, but to be able to supplement, augment, or assist with that perimeter defense. Okay. I think I went backwards in my slide presentation here. All right. So you can have one vendor, obviously. What you shouldn't have, so homogeneous is okay. You shouldn't have everything stuck into one basket. So this is a troubling challenge for me. We see well-known and very powerful firewall companies that are starting to put additional solutions in there. So we're going to put endpoint in there too. We're doing DMZ, VPN, and endpoint in this one solution. I don't think that's a good model. I don't think it's sustainable. Layered approach without disintegration. So if you think about a discrete appliance that is purpose built for a specific role, and if you are one of the companies that has the best here, the best here, the best there, then the next challenge you have to think about is orchestration and situational awareness, being able to take feeds off of those and put them into a accessible platform. And thinking about, again, spot improvements, most people have a fairly sophisticated, most of the people we deal with have a fairly sophisticated overlay. A lot of them need, sort of like a NIST approach, right? Where you're doing a gap closure. You're 80% there. Let's keep continually focusing on the 20% where we know we're vulnerable. So I talked a little bit, and this is sort of my last slide here. There's talent in the room, and then there's execs in the room. So the culture within the firm or the organization or agency makes a difference depending on the attack type. If you're an organization like we deal with not-for-profits where you literally have to go to a board to get approval, you may have to interact with that board during an issue. So kinetic attacks are sort of hallmarked by epic conference calls. And then the persistent attacks, you get into a situation where people, after the first couple of days, things sort of settle down into this weird routine where they know they're impacted, but no one really knows what to do, or people are waiting to be told what to do. The other thing that we find is interesting is you get organizations that get hit and then their shields go up. They become inaccessible. You cannot get to them. Even if you can tell by what's affected, you can tell how to help them, you can't get to them. The ability, so for the talent, your ability to remediate, to be heard and to present a solution, if you know what it is in that situation where it has become sort of this weird standing conference call or screaming match, you need accessible reporting. They don't want a story. They want reports that make sense, that illuminate and suggest a path of action. So that is perhaps the end of what I hope to share. I've got a few minutes left. Does anyone have any questions for me or any comments? If not, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
All right, well, thank you very much. That does conclude our network security session here. So I do realize we do have a couple of minutes open, so we'll be here in the side. If you have any questions for Brian, for Chris, for Bill, myself, we'll be more than happy to entertain those. Thank you.